All right, what's going on? This is the Ascension of Babylon, where we talk about the occult sciences and we talk about spiritual self-development. If you're new here and you don't know who I am and this is your thing, absolutely subscribe. And you can drop a like if you would like as well, because we go really deep into these topics. So what we're going to be talking about in this video is the higher self in relation to the soul. And I think for a long time, I looked at the higher self and the soul as being the same thing. But as I've built a closer connection with my higher self, I actually learned that even though they're connected, there are differences as well. And getting right into it, the higher self is going to be a much larger sentience in relation to the soul, because the higher self creates the soul to then have different evolutionary experiences in the form of whatever incarnation that soul essentially takes on. The higher self is going to be a fractal of what a lot of you may call God. I like to call it the source energy. Some people call it the Godhead. Regardless of the title that you give it, the higher self is a fractile of that greater intelligence or that greater energy, and the soul is a fractile of the higher self. Now, technically, past, present, and future are all happening at the same time, but from our perspective of time existing in the time matrix, it's going to be a very linear perspective. So technically, from this perspective, even though everything's happening all at once and just different, we could say frequential realities, the higher self is the future version of you. It is your totality. It's the most evolved version of your sentience. And technically, you would be a past version of the higher self. And what the higher self actually does is it offers support and it offers guidance to all of the past versions of it that make up its total sentience. So the higher self, to have evolutionary experiences in which it evolves, not only offers support to past versions of itself, but it will fractalize itself and create an individual soul in which it then injects into the time matrix to have different human experiences. And I'm not sure how many incarnations a person has. I don't think it's a set number, but I do believe it could be up to hundreds or sometimes thousands of incarnations that individual soul will actually experience for evolutionary purposes. And you can kind of think of it like a spiritual workout, because there's a lot of catalyst, there's a lot of oppression, and there's a lot of limitation here, on third density Earth. But it's this resistance that plays a very important evolutionary role, kind of like that workout at the gym. The more resistance you bring to your muscle, the more pressure and the more tear, the bigger the muscle is going to get. So the higher self fractalizes a piece of itself, inserts it into the time matrix, and as you're having all of these incarnational experience, it's almost like building the spiritual muscle of the higher self. And eventually what will happen is that soul will either move on to like other experiences in what we could call higher densities, or it can return to the overall complex of the greater sentience of the higher self, in which the higher self then uplines or uploads all of that experience that soul has gained through going through different incarnations and living different lifetimes. It uplines that sentience, in which greatly evolves the overall sentience of the higher self. Now, our entire life as a human being changes when we remember that we are our higher self, and that, all of the themes that we experience in our lives are orchestrated by us, and we don't need to overly control anything. We don't actually need to stress. We need to understand that we're the creator, that we're this greater sentience that is having a human experience, in the illusion of time, which essentially holds our human experience together. But when in reality, when we zoom out of time into the higher self perspective, all of our different various lifetime experiences are actually happening all at once. So time is an illusion, but when we zoom out of the human lens or the human perspective of time, our soul right now is actually experiencing many different lifetimes that are just happening in different timelines. And we can move in and out of these different timelines when we realize that we're actually the higher self and we're not just the human character. When you incarnate into a physical body, you go through what is known as the veil of forgetting. And essentially what this is you forget that you're a higher self that has fractalized itself in the form of an individual soul to have an evolutionary experience as a human being, to expand your own sentience on that higher self level. So because we forget, we will actually have to keep incarnating over and over and over and over. And in a sense, we get trapped in the cycle of reincarnation because we forget what we are. We forget that we're the creator of our entire experience. We forget that we're this greater sentience. And because of that, when we go through certain experiences, rather than it, there being a great lesson in it that we can extract a positive from, we actually get quite traumatized, and this trauma-based energetic resonance accumulates within that soul. So think about all the different lifetimes that you're experiencing all at once, right? And all, just many different timelines in general. And think about all the traumatic experiences that may be taking place. All of that gets uplined to the soul. So a lot of what you experience, let's say in this lifetime, is going to be a rerun or themes that are like a replay of things that you've been through in other lifetimes, so you can actually resolve that trauma-based frequency, which is more so going to anchor you to the illusion of time and to the physical plane, to where you have to keep incarnating over and over and over again, because I don't think that soul can return to the higher self if it has all these trauma-based frequencies. And trauma is an illusion. Trauma does not exist to the higher self. In fact, it actually chooses to experience the theme through the individual soul. Because on a higher self level, it can't experience trauma. So it has to inject itself or insert itself into the time matrix to actually have those experiences and to experience what we can call the illusion of physicality in that way. But the soul will get bound and will get trapped in these illusions, and it will have to keep incarnating over and over and over and over again until it eventually remembers that it is a higher self having a human experience. And just understanding that in itself can be immensely healing, to where now that soul will be able to release those trauma-based energetic frequencies that are kind of polluting it in a sense. And now this is giving that soul the ability to move on to the next stage in its evolutionary process, whether that's an incarnation in a higher density, maybe as an extraterrestrial, or whether it maybe just returns and kind of blends back or merges with the higher self. And I don't think what I'm explaining is black and white, but I'm conveying to you a concept so you can understand, your connection between your higher self, which is your greater sentience, it's you, and your soul, which is connected to the current version of you in all of the different lifetimes that are actually happening at the same time. So what you perceive to be the past is happening right now, just in a different timeline. And what you perceive to be taking place in the future is also happening right now, just in a different timeline. Everything that you are currently experiencing in your current reality is a simulation. So when we look at the concept of the matrix and everything being simulated, that is true. But what you want to understand is that you're the one running the simulation. So if you want to look at things almost like a video game or something like that, you're not just like the character of the game, you're not just the player of it, you're actually the creator of the entire simulated reality. You create it and then you insert yourself into it as a higher self, creating an individual soul that incarnates in a body to have that hands-on, individualized experience with your own creation. And when you realize that, the simulation itself is going to respond to you in a completely different way, and it's going to take on an entire different life. And you're going to be operating to your highest capacity, and you're going to be merging the heavens, which can represent your higher self, with the earth, which can represent, your physical body or your human character, or, utilizing Kabbalah to help you understand it. This would be the merging of Kether, representing the crown chakra, representing the higher self, even representing what a lot of people call God, merging that with earth, which is going to be associated with the physical plane. There is a merging that is taking place, and this merging not only benefits us and the entire mass collective, but it also, benefits the entirety of the universe. I think it benefits our solar system, our galaxy, and just the universal structure at large. So higher selves play a very important role in the evolution of the human species in general, and in the evolution of the entirety of the universal and the multiversal structure, which is why the higher self fractalizes a piece of itself to have these human experiences where there can be a lot of conflict, there can be illness, there can be sickness, there can be disease, there's trauma and things of that nature. But it's all by our own design, so we can actually know what it's like to experience that evolutionary tension. And going back to the gym analogy that I was giving you, this is expanding the spiritual muscle of the higher self, and the higher self being connected to everything else. Well, it's expanding the universe. It's expanding the multiverse. So our existence as human beings are very important, and our existence as a human being takes on a totally different life when we realize we're not just a human being, we are the higher self awareness that actually predates that human existence. We are very, very ancient beings, and we are even more than just our individual soul. Once again, our soul, which is connected to all of the various different incarnations, that we are experiencing, but we're the higher self that created the soul. So I think when it comes to spiritual self-development, a person goes through phases of understanding or phases of this higher consciousness embodiment. And I think a person connects with their soul. This is when they understand that they're interconnected with all things. And then I think a person actually kind of moves beyond that to realize that they're not just their soul, they're the creator of their own soul. And this is when, rather than just being interconnected with everything in their reality, we realize that we are the creator of it. And this is what it actually means to play the game on a higher self level. So there's layers to this higher sense of awareness that, spirituality often conveys to us in, many different ways of kind of conveying that concept of there being something bigger or something greater. You are what is bigger and you are what is greater. And all of the different various themes, especially the more so negative ones, that you have created in your life are actually there to help you remember that you are a much greater sentience. So what I wanted to convey to you in this video is that beyond being human, you are a soul that is experiencing many different incarnations that are technically happening all at once. Many different versions of you existing in different realities, having different human experiences. There's even potentially extraterrestrial sentience that may be connected to your individual soul as well, through, your soul wanting to incarnate as an extraterrestrial being. But you're not just that soul, you're the higher self that created that soul. That soul is a fractile of your higher self. And when we realize this, we go through a process and we start manifesting experiences that kind of refine that higher self-awareness in us so we can start existing in our reality as our higher self, and we actually wire that state into our nervous system. So that's what I wanted to say. Ladies and gentlemen, if you appreciate this content, hit that subscribe button. You could drop a like if you would like. I would certainly appreciate it. And I'm going to catch you in the next video. Thank you.